Hi everyone, I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yakker. My guest today is world famous past life regression and future life regression hypnotherapist and best-selling author, Dr. Bruce Goldberg. I'll be talking with him about his book, Past Lives, Future Lives Revealed. Dr. Bruce Goldberg, welcome to Paranormal Yakker.
It's a pleasure to be here, Stan, and I want to make a special offer for your audience. The work that I do here is important, and I like people to experience the idea of going back and forward in time. If your audience is kind enough to order my book, Past Lives, Future Lives Revealed, from my homepage, I will, in addition to sending them the book, send them a free CD called Fifth Dimensional Travel, where they can go into the fifth dimension and explore their own past, future lives, and even parallel lives. As long as they mention the show, they will get that offer. But it's not valid on Amazon or any other bookstore, just through my homepage.
Very good. And at the end of the interview, I will definitely talk about it again and give you the opportunity to give me all the information so they can order it. Now, I'm always curious to learn the twists and turns people take in life, how they got from point A to point B, where they were to where they are now, and the driving forces behind it. You went from dentist to renowned hypnotherapist specializing in past life regression and future life progression. How did that come about?
I was a practicing dentist, actually just part-time for 2 years out of the 13 years I practiced. And when I was in dental school, I had read the Search for Bridie Murphy book about a documented case of reincarnation back in Colorado in the 1950s. And that got me interested. I was going to use hypnosis in my practice dentally anyway for apprehension and pain control, medical uses, as we call that. But I decided to experiment to see whether I could actually take someone into a past life. I had a very dear friend who was a grad student in social work at the time, and she was more than happy to volunteer for this. I took her into about 8 different past lives, and she was able to overcome 2 habits and a phobia. I didn't know her very well. I didn't know she had these as a result of doing the regression. And I wasn't trying to do anything therapeutic, just to practice with the technique. That got me interested. You might say about 30,000 past life regressions later, the rest is history. I like to think of myself as now I drill into past and future lives rather than into teeth.
How, Dr. Goldberg, did the karma we acquired from our deeds and actions in a past life influence who and what we are and the road we travel in this, our present reincarnation?
We have what we call karmic lessons or tests. When you meet someone or something is difficult in your life or something very positive, the rewards, as I call that is not a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence at all. If you messed up in a past life or the earlier stage of this life too, the universe is going to give you opportunities to correct it. The purpose of reincarnation is to help us understand why we do what we do, what mistakes we made, and to avoid repeating the same mistakes and to grow spiritually so we can eventually ascend. That's the bottom line to reincarnation. My most famous case is called Search for Grace. It's the name of my second book, which was a documented case of reincarnation, the most documented, or one of the most documented cases from the last century, about a woman, and that was made into a CBS movie, by the way, which is available online. If you go on YouTube and type in The Search for Grace, you'll see the movie. It's a beautiful film. Richard Mazer, the actor, plays me in that. And this is a woman who I took into 46 different past lives. In 20 of them, she was murdered by the same man. And I call him Johnny in the book, not his real name. Johnny was relevant in her current life, and he tried to murder her on 3 different occasions. Using the techniques that I work with her and raising her soul's energy to a higher level, I call that my superconscious mind tap, she was able to break up with him. Remember, this guy tried to murder her 3 different times, and she couldn't break up with him. This was a way of literally saving her life. I didn't, she did. She broke up with him and had a really great life. She's still around. And over the years, she's contacted me several times to let me know that she's doing well. But this is an example of how people will meet the same people. If you're having a problem with someone now, it could be a family member, could be an employee, an employer, a neighbor, anyone that you're having problems with, I guarantee you there's a past life or karmic relationship. And the purpose isn't to torture you. The purpose is to overcome the victimization. The point here is that when you have any kind of extreme emotional relationship with someone, whether it's very good or very bad, it's a past life or karmic relationship. And this can explain soulmates and people who have great relationships with people, or people in your life that help you in your moment or hours of need. Those are good relationships. We call those boundary soulmates. We're supposed to learn things. We're supposed to perfect ourselves and to rise above it for eventual ascension. One of the benefits of doing past life regression and future life progression is that you eliminate the fear of death, because you realize that death is nothing but a change of dimension. Because thanophobia, which is the fear of death, is the number one phobia as people get older. You can learn about what I call psychic empowerment. You can use these techniques to overcome habits and phobias and other what I call self-defeating sequences, forms of self-sabotage. And you can access your higher self, which is the perfect part of your soul, which can actually read your Akashic records, which is the records of our past, present, future, and parallel lives. These are the advantages of doing this. Anyone can do this. This is not something that is limited to some special people. And when you do have things like dreams, every night, I know people don't remember them, but I'm going to give you the medical neurophysiology summary here. Every night we go into our dream cycle for about 3 hours a night. We call that the REM cycle. Stands for rapid eye movements. This comes from dream laboratory research, which is over, 70 years old. There's no argument in the field about this. And during these dreams, you're actually in the fifth dimension and you can connect with your higher self. So very often, if you have a sneak preview dream of a very strange environment, let's say you're in ancient Rome, or you're in China, or you're in ancient Greece, that could very well be a snippet of a past life of yours, a sneak preview that your higher self is trying to give you. And that is not uncommon at all. These things are part of what we call sneak previews, or the way the universe will help us to get a hint as to what's going on in our karmic cycle.
In your book, you include a number of fascinating case histories from the 35,000 past and future life regressions of some 14,000 individuals you've conducted. What I was about to do now was ask you about a few of them, two being about past lives and two about future lives. You've just answered the one that I was going to ask you about, the woman who was obsessed with a man who tried to kill her 20 past lives. That's an absolutely fascinating case, and you've already answered that. So obviously I'm not going to ask you that now. Now, I want to go into something else. Soulmates is an often discussed topic. Is there such a thing as a soulmate or not? That question is answered in your case about a true soulmate couple who shared a prior life in the Caribbean. Can you expand on that?
My research shows that there are 3 different kinds of soulmates. You have to understand the origin. We call this the oversoul. The oversoul is the original soul of an individual. It's split into a male version and a female version. The point is to reincarnate them together, or to get them together and rejoin this oversoul. And that's what the karmic cycle is about. You're not going to meet your true twin flame, the ultimate other half of you, until you're ready to ascend. Because if you did that, every other relationship would be horrible to you, because you just met the perfect person in your life. So the 3 kinds of soulmates are as follows. The one everybody wants to meet is what's called a twin flame, or what I call the true soulmate. That is the absolute other sexual half of the oversoul. But you don't meet that until the end of your karmic cycle. The second type, which is the most common and illustrated by my Search for Grace case, is retribution soulmate. These are people that you've had a lot of past lives with, all of which were negative. You're victimized by this. The person is a real creep. They're trying to abandon you, cheat you, murder you, you name it. Look at America. We have the highest divorce rate in the world. Every ex-wife or ex-husband represents a retribution soulmate. If you look at them, they don't end very, very well. So most people do fit into the retribution. You don't want to have that kind of relationship. Unfortunately, it's the most common one. And using these techniques, you can avoid that, by the way, and I'll explain that in a moment. The third kind, the one that is what I call the best one for the local person before they meet their twin flame, is called the boundary soulmate. And a boundary soulmate is somebody you've only had a few past lives with, but they were all positive. They were supportive, very loving, and very helpful to your own spiritual growth. So that's called a boundary soulmate. So that's really the best you're going to get until the end of your karmic cycle.
What can you tell me about an accountant's future life as an inventor in the 29th century underwater city?
This one is, it's kind of like, it's really not a particularly interesting life. It's just kind of showing the technology of the future. And I do want to make a reference to the 35th century because their technology is much better. But let me give you a more recent future life that I think will illustrate the principle here of how progression could be very helpful. I was working with a psychologist this is over 35 years ago, and he had a hand washing compulsion. In other words, when he would see a patient, they would shake his hand, he would immediately go into the bathroom and wash his hands. And he would do that for like 35 times a day. The guy was a real obsessive compulsive person, which is not a good characteristic if you're a therapist. I did some regressions with him, and in some of his past lives, there were issues where he had some factors that could have contributed to the hand washing compulsion, but not the solution. Then I asked him in trance, I didn't say go back to the origin, I said go to the origin. The subconscious mind, the soul, is very literal. So when I said go to the origin, he went automatically to the year 2088. And this is in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he is a technician in a nuclear power plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's a very unstable person psychologically. And one fine night, he's on night duty, instruments on meltdown, and he caused a meltdown of the entire city of Tulsa, Oklahoma in the year 2088. He said, oh my God, what is it with me? He didn't know much about quantum physics, which is the basis of this field. So I educated him. I said, look, that is what we call a frequency. It's only one possibility. There are many parallel universes out there. When I do a parallel universe experience, I call that a paragression. Past life regression is a past life, future life progression is a future life. But when you're dealing with a parallel life, it's a paragression. I said, why don't we go into the other parallel lives and see what your best option is? Because I can train people to actually switch into their ideal universe. So he said, okay, I got nothing to lose. So I do a paragression with him in the future. He goes back to the same era, 2088 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Instead of being a technician, now he's an actual nuclear scientist, much more psychologically stable. And August 8th, 2088 was the date that he freaked out in the previous paragression. This time, everything is fine. The date goes by, the year goes by, it's 2089, everything is fine. So what he did was able to avoid the meltdown of Tulsa, Oklahoma in 2088. When he came back from the trance, I did some what I call cleansing techniques, which is what I call the superconscious mind tap, so that he can raise the soul's energy to a higher level. A frequency vibration rate is the term that we use. And then all of a sudden, his hand washing compulsion disappeared. He became a normal human being, not a neurotic OCD therapist, but he became much more stable psychologically and energy-wise. And so that's the advantage of going into the future. Now, people, they always question, they say the future hasn't happened. How can you know that? The answer is not true. If you deal with quantum physics, once you leave the Earth plane, our current dimension, and you go into the fifth dimension, then all time is simultaneous. So therefore, you can perceive past, present, and future simultaneously. Think of Nostradamus. Think of some very famous psychics like that. So let me give you an example to show you how the future can be known by using techniques like this. I didn't know this person, but I'm going to mention his name, and I guarantee you've never heard of him. Unless you're familiar with my work, you would not know one item about this person. His name is Morgan Robertson. Morgan Robertson was a novelist. In 1898, look at the year now, 1898, he wrote a novel called Futility, in which a supposedly unsinkable ocean liner struck an iceberg on its maiden voyage and sank, carrying the elite society of two continents to their death. Now, why is that significant? Because 14 years later, in 1912, a similar unsinkable ocean liner named the Titanic, which had 3,000 passengers aboard, like Robertson's craft, by the way, it was 800 feet long. He gave it dimensions, weighed 70,000 tons with far too few lifeboats. And the real boat, like Robertson, struck an iceberg and sank with the loss of more than 1,000 lives. And Robertson had named his ship in the Futility novel Titan, and the real ship is the Titanic. This is way, way beyond the level of coincidence. What happened is I didn't know Morgan Robertson. Obviously, he died long before I was born. But my guess is that he saw into the future because he's quoting this verbatim. I mean, this is an amazing situation. There's no other explanation that you could possibly use to, you can tell me this is a coincidence. No, it isn't. But I'll tell you one of my famous cases also of an age progression that occurred back in 1996 here. What happened is a woman came to me, this was in June of 1996. You'll see the year is relevant. I call her Tammy, not her real name. She just graduated from college. She lives in New York City, and she's going to go to Europe in the last half of the summer, around July, mid-July or so, with her friends. They're going to like hang out in Europe, and then they're going to go to graduate school. She is anyway, in September, which is not uncommon. She comes to me to work with the idea of going out of the body. She had seen my Search for Grace movie. She was very excited, and she was a great patient. She was able to go into the fifth dimension, and then she would see things in the future during the week that she was in LA that would come true. In other words, I would see her on a Monday. She would go into her trance level on her own. I gave her one of my CDs for this. And then she would see herself going to a bookstore, meeting a guy with a tie-dye T-shirt and having a date with him. And that's exactly what happened. And she didn't know this guy from Adam. I think she had like 4 of these during the 5 days she was in LA. She goes, Doc, this is amazing. And I said, well, this is what happens when you go into the fifth dimension. I said, listen, we're all done. I wish you the best. You can keep in touch with me. Now we're talking about the end of June, about 3 weeks later. She calls me up and now she's panicking. She goes, Doctor, this is Tammy. I have an emergency. And I said, look, Tammy, I retired from dentistry to get away from that. What's going on? There are no emergencies in my field. She says, I use your CD. I decided to go into the future to see how my trip to Paris would be. She's going to go to Paris for the first stop. And I said, okay, so what happened? She goes, I see myself taking off in the jet from JFK. The plane goes up immediately, crashes. Everybody dies, including me. What do I do? And I said, look, Tammy, I don't want to tell you how to run your life. You haven't taken this flight yet. Just change your flight plans and call me at the end of the summer. So I don't hear from her until the end of August. She calls me and she goes, Doctor, this is Tammy. You saved my life. And I said, no, I didn't. What happened? She was going to go on TWA Flight 800, July 17th, 1996. That jet took off from JFK, immediately went up in the air, crashed into the Long Island Sound, whatever, killed 230 people, all craft, all passengers, all of the employees, everybody died. She would have been 231. But the universe had something else in mind for her, which is why she hooked up with me. I did not save her life. Her higher self did. I just connected the two together. So that's what we're dealing with here. This is an example of how going into the future is not that weird. It is quantum physics, and it can help literally save your life or it can help you to grow in or overcome issues like with the guy Pete, I call him, not his real name, the therapist who went into the 2088 to save the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mentioned in my book, I've written a bunch of other books. I've written 21 altogether. And I just want to refer to another one I wrote called Time Travel Smart Future. This is about people from the future, the 31st to the 50th century, that come back in time. The reason I mentioned that book is because there I have a lot of intimate knowledge of future technology, because I have actually met these time travelers, and I can train your audience to do that, by the way. The Exploring the Fifth Dimensional Travel CDs that I talked about, if they order the Future Lives Revealed book, can help them do that. But here's an example of technology from the 35th century. The 35th century is one of the greatest century in history for technology and spiritual growth. There's a man by the name of Tatos, T-A-T-O-S, who develops time travel. And this is the 31st century. But about a couple of hundred years later, they rewarded his image by creating an amusement park called the Land of Tatos. So this floats about 2 or 3 miles above the earth. There's a force field around it so you don't fall off the edge. And when people go to this amusement park, they're able to go back in time. They're able to go to the Renaissance for an afternoon, or ancient Rome. In other words, it's an anti-gravity amusement park. There's another device called the food simulator, which I call the Mind Witch machine. It looks like a microwave, and all you do is use your thoughts to think of what you want to have to eat, like the proverbial chicken sandwich. It then goes on, it activates, and it creates the food. It's harmless, it's nutritious, you're not going to gain weight, and you'll never starve to death. So that's called the food simulator. Then my favorite device is called the Alpha Singlarium. This one is heavy. It looks like an isolation tank. And what it does, it sends energy and sound through your body, stimulating the body's natural production of the hormone DHEA, which is a neurotransmitter, eventually becomes testosterone in men and estrogen in women. And what this does, it slows down the aging process by facilitating the immune system. The collapse of the immune system is why people age. The average 35th citizen lives between 500 and 900 years young because of the Alpha Singlarium. That's a pretty popular device. Then there's what I call a holographic relaxation center. It's sort of like the holodeck on Star Trek, where if you can't go anywhere and you want to go on vacation, but you don't have the money for it or the time, you can just use this holographic device and go to Tahiti or go to Paris or go anywhere you want to go. It's really kind of fun. Each house and office will have a local little teleportation station, so you can teleport locally around the city and even throughout parts of the country. You don't have to use a vehicle. Teleportation will be around by the 35th century, actually before that. And time travel will be developed by teleportation by the 35th century also. These are some of the technology advancements that are going to be real and a lot of fun. These things are going to make life easier. The average person in the 35th century, they're very tall and slender. Very few people are overweight. There's no cancer or AIDS or lupus or any of the high mortality diseases. They work about 15 hours a week in their work week. They have plenty of time to enjoy themselves and their family. And by the way, people worry about all the stress and wars that we have and all the negativity we have in our society. By the end of the 21st century, our current century, that's the end of all the problems. As you begin the 22nd century and beyond, life is going to be a lot more fun. Politically, medically, energetically wise, culturally, spiritually, you name it. All you have to do is wait. I know it's not going to affect you and I so much, but in your next lifetime, you're going to have a lot more fun than you are now.
I was just going to ask you about the first hypnotherapy session of one of your patients, which resulted in an exploration of his future life as a 35th century time traveler, but you answered that, and that was great. It's good to know we do have a future. I have to say that, because some people say we're not going to have a future. You do.
Let me give you the basic bottom line to therapy, though. These days, I don't do many regressions and progressions, and I'll tell you why. They're really not therapeutic. I mean, they sound like a lot of fun. You can learn a lot about yourself. I understand that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But let's say when somebody needs to work out a problem, like in the Search for Grace case, the woman I call her Ivy, not her real name in her current life, she didn't overcome the obsessive behavior with that guy, Johnny, trying to murder her just because she found out that he murdered her in 20 past lives. She did what I did with her, which is called a super conscious mind tap. This is where, while the person's in trance, we're talking to their subconscious mind, the soul, and then I'm introducing the soul to its perfect counterpart, which is, we call that the higher self, which is also known as the superconscious mind. And that superconscious mind can raise the soul's energy to a higher level. Think of it as an energy immune system. And when you do that, you become immune to the issues you were previously vulnerable to. So you're not going to make the same mistakes. And in fact, you're going to attract, through the law of attraction, much more positive people into your life. And this is how you can grow spiritually and literally overcome problems. The key here is not just logging in a whole bunch of past lives and future lives. It's not the answer. The answer is to connect with your higher self. This can help your creativity, overcome procrastination. It can help you generate abundance. I call that karmic capitalism. I'm an example of this. I've done all the techniques on myself. I went from dentistry to hypnotherapy. That was not a very lucrative transition to most people, but it is with me. I'm not trying to brag, but I've been extremely successful in this field. Didn't have to be, because the universe, I'm working with universal laws, and the universe needed one less dentist in the world, but one more parapsychologist. You can use these techniques to look younger. I play tennis every weekend. This November is my 76th birthday, and I weigh less now than I did when I was in college over 55 years ago. If I can do this, anyone can do it. This is the advantage of hypnosis and superconscious mind taps, spiritual growth, shortening up the karmic cycle. Every advantage in the world that you need or want are done by these techniques with absolutely zero negative side effects. None. No harm, no foul. All you can do is benefit.
There are many theories from various sources as to the origin of our planet. You reveal in your book what you believe to be the true origin of planet Earth. What is that belief, and how did you arrive at it?
Of course, there's a lot of extraterrestrial origins to our species. I know my colleagues don't like me to talk about it, my conservative colleagues, whatever. But if you look at the history from Homo habilis to Homo erectus to Homo sapiens, which is us, the difference is extreme and in a very relatively short period of time. So there's been about 300 different extraterrestrial groups that have come to this country, but that isn't the big picture. Let me show you what the real big picture is. Yes, there have been we all have extraterrestrial genetics. No argument in that field. Believe me, trust me. All right, but there's a type of regression I've done that is very unique. I don't know anybody else that does this. I wish I did, but I don't. It's called the light people. So let me show you what this is. The ultimate evolution of us is not to have a physical body, is to be pure energy. And one form of pure energy is light. Now, you could say radiation, you could say heat, but light is a lot better source. So in doing regressions, I have found out that there were these extraterrestrials called the light people. They were pure light, no physical body. They came to the earth and they said, we're going to kind of play around here with the various primitive men, upright Homo species that we have, or genus. One particular case was a guy who was like a real jerk. He was occupying the body and he was screwing around. He was doing sexual things. He was committing crimes, murdering people. He was just a jerk. He was very unstable. So his supervisors punished him by trapping him into the physical body. And that is the origin of the karmic cycle. He was trapped in. So yes, he would die, but then he would have to reincarnate. And he wasn't the only one that did that. So that to me is the true origin of the karmic cycle. In my Time Travelers from Our Future book, I talk about the Lyrans and the Syrians, the two major ET groups. The Pleiadians come in there too, and the reptilians. not too often because they eat their mistakes. They're nasty. The Greys are there. But the Lyrans and the Syrians were the ones that about less than 1 million years ago were the ones that really manipulated the genetic components of our species. So we all have extraterrestrial genetics. We've interacted with these ETs. So we're all hybrids, no matter how you want to slice it. So that's the origin of our species. The problem today is if you do a DNA sample, you can say, well, this is a pure human DNA sample. We don't know what a pure human DNA sample is, because if we have extraterrestrial genetics for the past 1 or 1.5 million years, that would be the baseline of our DNA. They don't have a DNA sample of a Lyran or a Syrian. They don't have that to compare it to, or reptilian. They don't have that. If they do, maybe it's some underground military base, but they're not broadcasting it. Again, that's why I do feel that we all have extraterrestrial origins, and the light people are, to me, the origin of the karmic cycle.
As unbelievable as many of your cases may appear to a skeptic, you credibly dispel the myths surrounding the practice of past future life hypnotherapy, and you show how it is now recognized as a valid and viable tool by many experts throughout the world. Could you elaborate on that?
If I was to ask you and your audience, what is the #1 medical clinic in America? Now, most people would get it, everybody would get it wrong. The answer that would come up mostly is the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. That's #2, not #1, #2. What #1 is? Walter Reed Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland, NIH, National Institute of Health. That's where the president, the Supreme Court justices get their physicals and their medical care. You can see why it's #1. It is a superior institution. If you got a weird disease, that's where you want to go. It's free. It's a teaching institution, and it is the #1 institution in the world, not just this country. All right, so why do I mention that? So there was a study done in 1990 by the New England Journal of Medicine, which is actually a much more credible journal than the Journal of the American Medical Association. The New England Journal of Medicine is, to me, #1. And they did a study, and what this guy was doing, he was trying to calculate the number of visits. Remember, this is 34 years ago now. The number of visits Americans make to a traditional physician. And he had 4 categories. He had a pediatrician, a general practitioner, an internal medicine one, and the general practice resident, so to speak. Those 4. Those are all MDs. And the answer came out to be 388,000 visits was the answer. Now he said, let me do this with alternative practitioners. This would be hypnotherapy, Ayurvedic medicine, guided visual imagery, Reiki healing, all the things that are into the what people would call the woo-woo field. It's actually shamanic field. And the answer came out to be 488, not 1,000, it was actually million. So why more? Well, obviously the ones that were going in the first group didn't get their result that they wanted, so they went to alternative medicine. He realized that more people are going to alternative medicine than in traditional medicine or allopathic medicine. He figures why. And that was the origin of the division of NIH that was established 2 years later called OAM, the Office of Alternative Medicine. It's part of the National Institute of Health, which I will remind you is the #1 medical institution in the world. That's your federal tax dollars and mine pay for it. There's your credibility. Why would the federal government, and when they ask the psychiatrists who run this, they say, why are you doing it? This is shamanic disciplines. Why? Because they said it works, and we want to know why. Shamanism has been around for 50,000 years. Name me any discipline, medicine or psychology, that's been around for 50,000 years. The answer is 0. Most of them are less than 150 years old. So that's the credibility. You can't beat the NIH and OAM. And by the way, just go online, Google Office of Alternative Medicine, Google NIH. You'll see all the divisions on there. There's about 30 different divisions. And hypnotherapy is part of it. Past life therapy is part of their classification. So past life therapy is ordained by the US government as being a valid therapeutic regimen. In DC, they have another group where they list all the various specialties. And one of them is parapsychology. This includes hypnosis and past life therapy. And that's been around since 1969. Many of the opponents tried to get rid of it, but they didn't. It's still there. There's a credibility here. There's also a group in Golden, Colorado called the ISSSSEEM. It's a very long name. And they study energy medicine, which is going to be the future of medicine. No drugs, no surgery, strictly energy medicine. Energy medicine is going to be the future. And that also relates to my work here because I'm dealing with energy medical approaches.
Your book contends, and you backed it up with facts, that people have the power to customize and control their destinies. And through hypnotherapy, we can eliminate past life and current problems and attain our karmic purpose. Should viewers of Paranormal Yakka want to buy Past Lives, Future Lives Revealed, learn about the other books you've authored, your webinars, or book a private or telephone session with you, how, Dr. Goldberg, can they do that?
Okay, well, first, the easiest way is to go to my homepage, which is www.drbrucegoldberg.com. And all my 21 books are listed there. There are CDs they can order, my webinars. Every second Sunday of the month, I do a webinar. My next one is going to be on how to avoid abduction by ETs. It's going to be a lot of fun. And there are videos. I have a YouTube channel, which they can see in the upper right-hand corner of my homepage, in which they can see 55 different videos of me on national television doing past life regressions, future life progressions, a woman contacting a time traveler from the 36th century, Jerry Springer, the late Jerry Springer's past life regression, which I did on the show, is on there too. So there's a lot of fun things they can do. And I have articles on there, well over 120 different CDs. They can actually experience this themselves. And the videos also show some of my workshops. I've done lectures and workshops along with the experiential television interviews where I've done hypnosis on the air. So there's a ton of information on my homepage. And again, they can book appointments with me. I do Zoom sessions for most of my 95% of my therapy is done by Zoom. So I see patients from all over the world. If they want to just get to know me and ask me a little bit about how I can treat them, they can do a telephone consult, which is only an hour. It's a lot less expensive than a session. And I can diagnose them and give them an idea of what's going on. Anyway, they can learn all about this and, more importantly, experience the idea of going into the fifth dimension, connecting with the higher self, and doing a super conscious mind tap, because that is the therapy.
Dr. Bruce Goldberg, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yakka. Yakking with you has been quite illuminating. Thank you.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow of Paranormal Yakka. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.